Great to have you all here. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Currency news started a year ago. The whole purpose of what we tried to do was to cut through the noise. There's so much information out there, and to try and build something with kind of actionable intelligence. And the whole purpose was to explain the economics of your world. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. And it's been fabulous so far. We've had fabulous people like Tim Cohen join us, and it's just been great. And we have a great panel today, and it'll be great to chat to them about our subject, which is pretty much why has South Africa not achieved the GNU dividend? So I suppose I should get on with introducing them all. Firstly, Ndivhuho Netshitenzhe, who is a Stanlib economist, senior economist at Stanlib, and she's an expert on the South African economy and China, and she knows it from the inside too, because she was previously at the South African Reserve Bank. She has a master's degree in economics from the University of Pretoria and another from Cambridge University, and she's super incredibly smart. So I think, if leaders of future, if you want to know where she'll be in 10 years' time, you can say you saw her first at the Roderick Gallery. And you can get her to sign your arm or your glass of wine or something that Vernon will give you. Then Jannie Durand, who is the CEO of Remgro. Now, you might not know who Remgro is, but you will probably know the companies it owns. They will have touched your life in some way. Companies like Mediclinic, for example, CIVH, they own a number of things. They own Dark Fiber Africa, Vumatel, they own 32% of E-Media, for example. I mean, I don't know why anyone in their right mind would invest in media at the moment, Jannie, but that's a little bit just yes. Yes, okay. Oh, that's smart. Oh, only we could all do that. So Jannie is a chartered accountant. He was chief investment officer at Remgro for a while. Has been there for a long time. And this is the person who, whenever I speak to Johan Rupert's, he will always tell me, "Oh, just speak to Jannie. Jannie knows everything." So this is the man who does indeed know everything, I hope, and can answer all of our questions from smart people on the panel, like Tim Cohen, who is one of my favorite journalists. He said I'm not allowed to say he's the smartest journalist he knows, because the bar is incredibly low, apparently. But, when we started Currency, all of us said when we started it, there's one journalist we always want to work with, and that's always Tim Cohen. So all of us who started it said, if we can get Tim Cohen to join us and be part of it, it'll be a success. So in that sense, we've already succeeded, no matter how badly tonight goes. Tim Cohen has a couple of great stories, which he can tell you tonight, but one of them is about how this guy in KZN, when he was studying law, he just hated this guy. And this guy who knew everything, every answer to every question. He would always have read every case. He would just be so swatted up. And Tim hated this Gavin Hood guy and said, well, I just hope he's a massive failure. And then eventually he came to university and discovered this guy dropped out. So he thought, that's fantastic. My life is going to be more successful than that guy. And then the next time he said he saw him was on TV, walking up the red carpet in Hollywood to get an Oscar for Totti, which diminished that. But Tim, if there was an Oscar for journalism, Tim would be the person who gets it. So it's fabulous that you're part of it. Guys, I think we're going to ask you a few questions and get on with it. And then, please ask questions. We have some very smart people. And we have Alan and Vernon and other people here. Scant praise. No, we have some fabulously smart people in the audience, so please feel free to engage and ask much better questions than I can. I suppose if I just want to start, I'll take a seat and ask, I suppose, of all the panel members, the idea that the economy hasn't done that well over the past year and a half, 18 months since the election, is that valid or not? Are we overreacting? We've seen GDP growth of 1%, which is, I suppose, the president talks of 3.5%, 4%. Why have we not got it? Is it not? Are we overreacting? Is it just a long time scale? And perhaps indeed we could start with you on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. You're not overreacting at all. In fact,
I'm not overreacting.
I think you're right in saying that the economy has barely really moved from where it was. Last year, the economy only grew by 0.5%. Unemployment is at its highest level. It increased from the previous quarter. So with unemployment at 33%, more than that, you can easily say that the economy has really benefited from sort of the results of the elections and the hope that we had following the elections and what we had expected to happen from then. So, yeah, the economy hasn't grown. 0.5% last year. What we expect this year is for the economy to only grow at around 1%, which is actually higher than what we had planned or had forecast a little earlier in the year, where we were like, we'd be lucky to get 0.9% by the end of this year. So we are stuck at a sort of a sub 1% growth for a very long time now. In the last 10 years, the economy has only grown by 0.7%. So it's definitely disappointing. Last year was lower than the 10-year average. So there's a lot to do, a lot of work to do.
Jannie, can I ask, as somebody who's running a company in this environment, I mean, how is it running a company where you had expected so much more after the election, and it hasn't yet happened? I mean, how does that feel on the ground to be doing that?
Yeah, thank you. It's tough. I must say it's tough out there. I think South Africa is getting poorer. If we talk about 1% economic growth, 1.92%, if you take the GDP per capita, as an individual, we're all getting poorer. As an individual, we're getting less services. Individual, the government, even the GNU is not performing. And unfortunately, we can see that in the results. So if you look at today, what I've always talked about is the pie. Maybe just use e-media as an example, just to make it quite practical. The advertising pie is only so big in South Africa. For the last 5 years, that what has been spent on advertising, excluding online gambling, excluding that, has actually shrunk. So that is getting smaller. So what is happening in the real world out there today, all that you can fight is your competitor, because there's no tailwinds, volume growth. If you look at the liquor industry, at the hospital industry, there is no natural volume growth. A very good indicator for us, as we own 50% of Mediclinic, and not just in South Africa, but also in the UAE and Switzerland, is just the South African situation. You look at the medical aid numbers, and that has been going down. The only medical aid that's growing is a government medical aid, because they employ more people, but the private sector and the individual on the street is actually buying down cheaper products, lower products, and actually leaving medical aids. And that's a very good economic indicator. So I actually think we're not growing, we're actually getting poorer as individuals.
Just to add with Jannie, just to put that in numbers, for the last 10 years, the population growth has been around 2.4%, while economic growth has been 0.9%. So it's literally the pie is getting smaller, and the people who need some of that pie is getting bigger. So we are getting poorer as a country.
It's almost unfair to ask Tim, as a journalist, do you feel like you're getting poorer?
No, I was poor already. So no, the only thing I would add, I mean, we shouldn't be too depressed about the world, but the context in which we are in a sort of static position is that the rest of the world is getting much richer. So we don't have the excuse that we are being dragged down by anybody else. It's our own responsibility. It's our own job to fix.
And I mean, in terms of obstacles, you actually have seen Eskom being fixed to some extent. I think we underrate the extent to which Eskom has been fixed, because we lived in the dark for 10 years, and 2023 was abysmal. I think they had 329 days of load shedding in that year. It was outrageous. And so we underrate the extent to which that should have lifted the economy. What are the obstacles that still remain, do you think, Tim?
I think it's much simpler than people say. So, South Africa has plan after plan after plan after plan. We just got a new one. There's a new 10-point plan.
Well, it's kind of an old 10-point.
Yeah. Something. But what I always think, I think South Africa's a real fundamental problem, and I really like your views on this too, because we are. Although we're bringing out plans, the question that isn't being asked is on what basis are those plans founded? From my very kind of simplistic, ignorant, journalistic point of view, the correlation between economic freedom and economic growth, is absolutely demonstrated around the world. It's almost unquestionable. The more economic freedom you have, the higher your economic growth. And all of the plans that I see coming out of government don't seem to be founded on that idea. They're founded on fixing individual problems. You know, they are essentially in Band-Aid mode. You know, they're not in. We need a different sort of philosophical position. So I don't know whether that's too highbrow or too airy-fairy, but I mean, I do think you know, if you had to look at the practical things you would do, if your philosophy was based on increasing economic freedom, then you would do things like you would, you know, the one thing that I tripped up recently was on tariffs. So South Africa has is tariffs around 5,000 product lines. So now 4,000 of those are products that we don't make. You know, I mean, we shouldn't tariff them because, you know, we're not protecting the only, you know, the only reason to have tariffs is to try and protect our local industry. And if you're not in that industry, well, I mean, obviously there are, you know, there's some things that you want to tariff in order to try and stimulate an industry, you know, given. But, you know, sort of very practical things like that you would fix if you were mentally attuned to the idea of enhancing economic freedom.
Indeed, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you have I'm sure, very strong views on tariffs and how loosening the economy would benefit the economy to some extent. Do you feel like we are encumbered by massive amounts of red tape?
Completely. I mean, the amount of regulation that is present for businesses is the highest in the world in South Africa. So we have more regulation in South Africa than what China has. And that's saying something because China is a communist country and is built on regulating just about everything. So the red tape, the amount of hoops that businesses have to jump through is just insurmountable in South Africa. It makes it hard to even start a business, to even succeed as a business, and to even want to succeed as a business, to want to expand and invest in your business makes it harder and harder. So the red tape is just bogging the country down, and it's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get business involved in helping grow the economies, because it's just too expensive for them to try and operate in South Africa. So they just sort of keep chugging along, honestly.
I mean, yeah, you've spoken about this. You've talked a lot about state blockages. I mean, your view on that, running a company, including companies that deal with entrepreneurs and small companies, you will have seen exactly the impact of that on stifling entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been outspoken in the media about, I mean, how long it takes to get transactions through. I mean, the Vodacom CIVH deal took us 5 years. We got Competition Commission approval or from the appeal court about a month ago. We're still waiting for ICASA to give us approvals, and over 5 years. So it's unbelievable. Maybe just to tag on to a point you've mentioned about freedom, and we must be, why is America and some other countries so successful? Because they've got entrepreneurs. They've got entrepreneurs that actually got the ability to start businesses without the red tape. They can close down business if it doesn't work. That can employ people, but if it doesn't work out, that can also get rid of the people without having all of these shackles around them. I sometimes think bureaucrats sit in these offices and they're not entrepreneurial, and they think just how can they regulate business more and more, because they have to earn some salaries and it's justified. So the more regulations they can feed, the more they actually think they earn their salary. So it's actually, what we must realize, big companies don't actually create jobs. Big companies actually get leaner, more efficient, especially when the economy is growing. We're actually doing retrenchments. So who's actually creating jobs? Entrepreneurs. And those are the people that is not living at our level. They're people in the townships, people in the rural areas that need to create bed and breakfasts, tourism, all of those things. They are actually going to drive this country forward, not the big businesses. But we as big business need to create stability. We need to make sure that the things work, that the people can operate in an environment that gives them railway lines, infrastructure, hospitals, schooling, and all of those things. And I think that is critical. And then young entrepreneurs will survive. I actually think Harry Fourie is not far off. I mean, we're good friends. And Harry Fourie is actually quite correct. You really go to some of these areas and they analyze it in their Capitec bank accounts. So what is coming in, how many different income streams got. Unfortunately, a lot of the money goes out in online gambling. I think that's probably one of the worst things that we can do in this country. But yes, I think economic freedom, encouraging entrepreneurs. That's why we're so passionate about business partnership. And Dr. Rupert has created in the 70s, of the amount of jobs that they've created just through business partners, over 1 million jobs in the country since 1976.
That's such a fascinating point Harry Fourie raised about how he thinks that unemployment's much lower than it is. And Tim argued that point of how he thinks that unemployment is much lower. But I think that, if you look around and you see job adverts, you see massive queues for jobs, I still think that it's dangerous to underrate how serious the job crisis is. I mean, do you really think it could be severely underrated, the unemployment numbers?
I think if it wasn't underrated, if it was really at 40% or 35%, where the social fabric of this country would have been in a different shape. I think South Africans are quite, I always say they're quite resilient, they're tough, they're bulldog terriers, and we muddle through. And one way or the other, they actually manage to make a living in those areas. Doesn't matter what they do, but it does not formally record it. But I don't think that's a solution long term. I think we need to educate our people. We must make them employable. And unfortunately, the education system is failing our youth. And that's why we spend a lot of money on that. And one of our big things is actually broadband, fiber to the townships, getting that going. That is why it was so frustrating with the AVH Vodacom deal. We would have had probably another, I don't want to spend probably about between 10 and 15 billion we would have spent on fiber in township just to get the people onto the internet, what we call democratizing the internet, to make it affordable for people. For 100 rand a month, you can get full broadband. And that is a product that we want to roll out, and we've been stopped.
I think that's a tangible example of how things could be totally different if you had slightly looser rules. I mean, Tim, you covered the competition, that particular case. What are your thoughts? Was it for genuine reasons that the Competition Commission was so slow on this? Why do you think they did that?
No. I think this is part of the idea about the interventionist government. This is we've had for a long time, a government that has been, understandably increasingly worried about the level of unemployment, and has been. I don't know whether this is true, but I get the sense of desperation about how to fix it, and in that desire to preserve jobs, it's a very difficult thing to do in those circumstances to not intervene or not feel that you should intervene. It's a sort of natural human reaction, I think, that you and it really takes a resilient mental framework to pull back and really believe that the market will sort this out. That the private sector's more capable of solving this problem than you are. But in a sense, this is something that we were hoping that the GNU would fix. You know what I mean? We hope that the amalgamation of the ANC with new political parties, there would be a new blood flow through the government, and to some extent there has been. But I get the impression we don't have a government of national unity. We have governments of mutual hate, and that's not a terrible thing. You can. If it seems to be working, so maybe this is the next step in the process. Will be having a government of sort of mutual slight attraction for this, and then eventually we will have a government of national unity,
a government of less hatred,
government of less hatred. Here,
Indy, I wanted to ask about that. That thing that Tim raised about. The government almost seems desperate to try and fix it and keeps coming up with plans like the 10-point economic plan that the president released last week. I'm not as down on the president as some of my former colleagues. I hope Julieta's not around. Can you hear this? I think it's a lot of jealousy because we just don't have couches that are as rich as his. But I wonder that the 10-point economic plan doesn't look like anything new. It doesn't look like anything that will unleash massive growth in the economy. It looks like a kind of, like Tim said, you almost have to have a plan to prove you're doing something. Is there anything new in what government has suggested in the past year or the past couple of months that could perhaps catalyze some kind of growth?
Unfortunately not. With the 10-point plan, most of, if not all of those, suggestions of those plans are already in Operation Vulindlela. I don't know if you know about Operation Vulindlela. It's literally this reform agenda that has been started within the presidency's office. A lot of everything that he had actually pointed out has already start, well, at least we're hoping they're implementing within Operation Vulindlela. So it's nothing new. It's just an idea of this desperation to look like you're doing something. So you're going to keep coming up with new things instead of what they really should be focusing on is looking at what they already have, what they've done, and communicating that more effectively so that people understand that although things are moving slow, they are moving. And turning around a country or an economy that was so badly battered since 2009, 2010 maybe, the economy has just been so weak and so slow that it's never really recovered from the global financial crisis. That's been how many years? Like, I want to say 15 years of really, really bad economic growth. It's going to take a long time to turn that around. And that's the kind of communication they need to give instead of coming up with new plans. Because what happens then, people become tired. You'll be like, oh, okay, not another plan, not another idea, not another reform agenda that you're not going to implement. All we're going to get is more documentation, which people then become tired of because it also gives the feeling of, oh, that's going to just give us more regulation and more red tape that we need to go through. So implementation needs to become key. They need to focus on that and actually communicate that with the public and show, because Operation Vulindlela has done actually amazing work in a lot of areas when it comes to the visa system. It's been really good. You talked about electricity earlier. It's part of it, a lot of it is actually thanks to Operation Vulindlela. A lot of it also is because when there's a crisis, then you start doing something. Obviously, like if you're not going to have electricity, you need to fix things. And I think that's also a problem that government has, is that they don't pay attention to the issues until it's become a crisis, or until it's become so bad that if you don't fix it, then things are really just going to fall apart. And so now what they need to focus on is how can we take what we've done in the electricity and the energy sector and implement it in the other network industries and get those fixed again. So we don't need any more plans. We have enough plans. We are very good at plans. We just need to implement the ones that we already have, because they are good and they do understand what the problem is, and they know, I guess, generally how to fix it. And they know that businesses and private sector is really the key to doing it. They just need to actually do it now and show that they're doing it.
My colleague Claire Bisseka over there wrote a lot about this, how we have precipice anxiety. We only act once we finally get to the precipice and then hold back from it. Otherwise, it's not really worthwhile. It's sort of country with ADHD, like, well, let's do other stuff until we really have to, which is sort of how I live my life as well, I suppose.
If I may, I just want to add on to something she said there. And I think where we operate sometimes in various towns, let me take a specific example. We operate the second biggest chicken plant in South Africa, and actually in Africa.
That's Rainbow.
That's Rainbow Chicken. Actually doing quite well now.
Oh, it's not bad.
Obvious. But in any case, so we actually run the waters for the municipalities, because we're sitting right at the reservoir, so we make sure it's fixed every day. We maintain it at our costs. And they gave us a lot of problems in the beginning. They didn't want to allow us to do that, but it meant that town wouldn't have had water. So we're looking after that. We're looking after the roads around where we are. We're looking after the substation electricity side, because we've got the ability to recruit people that can do these things, and we pay for themselves. And so they double that. They work, fix the substations in the industrial area, and then they go and look in the waters in the afternoon and in the morning. And if it wasn't for that in the private sector in some of these towns wouldn't exist. Our biggest opposition, Astral, operates out of Standerton. They've got the same problems, and I think sometimes they got bigger problems than us. To advantage sometimes, and that is the worst thing. So we get advantage because they can't supply chicken, and that's not the right thing to do. At centrally, you can do both the best plans, and I'm also tired of plans, to be quite frank. Centrally, you can do this, but it doesn't get implemented across the country. And who implements it? It's the municipalities and the service delivery. And that is where we fail dismally. We live here in a bubble in the Western Cape. I live in Stanlib Asset. It's even more of a bubble. If you really go to the areas where we operate and where the people are working, where the factories are, it's dismal, absolutely dismal. Ekurhuleni, those areas, I mean, you can't get to your factories. I mean, the potholes and things like that, we fix it ourselves. So it's actually, if you go out to some of those areas, you would be shocked.
I'm from Joburg, where if you see a bubble, you automatically worry because you assume there's a giant pothole underneath it. On that point, I mean, isn't that a perverse incentive? It creates some massive perverse incentive for the government not to do anything. If the private sector bails it out at times, I mean, you pay tax for a reason. That's the fundamental principle of tax. I mean, surely by bailing out the government when they should do it, leads to expectation that the private sector always will do it, which is then difficult where there is no private sector player in specific municipalities. Then nothing will get done.
Absolutely. I mean, look at town just outside Rustenburg, Koster. It's there they stopped it, the private sector from getting involved. Not the private, it's actually farmers who get involved in trying to actually uplift the town. And so you're absolutely 100% right. Why did the private sector get involved in those 3 work streams? And I'm part of the crime and corruption, and it's quite interesting what's
You
happening.
mean the work stream, not actual crime and corruption?
The business for
It's mostly in government.
It's pretty, just numbers. I mean, you would know the numbers, but Eskom, why is Eskom fixed? They got 350 private sector people involved. Ex-Eskom people spent 12,500 hours over the last 2 years to help and fix it. So it's back where we are today. We're not where we want to be. Now the problem with Eskom is they don't actually want to unbundle the grid because they know they're going to start creating competition for them. So that is, although it's been approved, the legislation, they're actually stonewalling it at the moment, which is a big concern because it will be difficult for private operators, private suppliers to get onto that if the grid is not independent because Eskom is going to stonewall it. For us, Transnet, the problem there is they're actually totally doesn't want the private sector to get involved. And that's why Transnet is so far behind of what has happened at Eskom. Unfortunately, there you get some of those things, and they're keeping the private sector up. But remember, the private sector can't fund everything. And we've got only so much capacity, we've got only so much money, and things like that. So we pay taxes in any case.
India, isn't that a huge issue? The fact that the government is just waiting for the private sector to do something. Is that partly why we haven't reached that 3.5% growth? Unless there's a reluctance to let go of the state levers of power. At the same time, letting the private sector fix areas that the government should be doing. It seems like to be this massive contradiction in some ways.
It's definitely a contradiction because in areas where the private sector can thrive and come in and actually help grow the economy, the government does stonewall. Like, I actually really wanted to mention the fact that a lot of some of the things that haven't actually been implemented in Operation Vulindlela is because there's been so much pushback from some of the stakeholders, including the SOEs. Some of the government departments also aren't really participating as they should. Luckily, within the transport department, we're actually getting Barbara Creasy, who's really interested in actually helping improve logistics. But in other areas, we're seeing these big, I guess, sort of these big fish that didn't want to let go of the power that they have. But then because in the smaller municipalities, the municipalities where you don't have the same big business coming in, nobody's doing anything. And because no one is pushing back and no one is actually able to hold government or local municipalities accountable, it just falls apart. And I think that's where the private sector comes into play, especially when it comes to your bigger businesses. You need to hold the municipalities accountable. Yes, it's important that you create things that are functioning within the municipality, but then in order to actually get them to do their job is holding them accountable for their work. So this issue of, I forgot which municipalities was, where people stopped paying their rates and taxes because they were like, okay, until you're able to fix the issues that we're going to pay the money, but not to the municipality, but to a different account until you guys are able to actually get things going again. So those are the kinds of relationship I think the private sector needs to have with municipalities, especially from a municipal level. That's what we need. From a national level, we need more private sector participation. I know you're saying that the private sector only has so much capacity and resources. Government has even less. So honestly, all we have is the private sector to help us especially from a financial perspective, especially from a expertise perspective. The private sector remains sort of the most important participant in this. And that's who we need to bring in from a national level. Local level is holding them accountable and trying to reduce the level of graft that's happening within that level so that they can sort of come to the party really and provide the services that they have promised.
You say the government doesn't have, but government does have money. Is it not a question of how they spend the money? Is it not a misallocation of resources?
Yeah, well, completely, right? But then every single year you're borrowing more and more. So at some point you can't borrow more and misallocate those same resources. You're not going to be able to get, and if you do get money to borrow from, it's going to be exorbitant interest rates. So when I say they don't have the money, I'm saying they don't have the capacity to borrow anymore to misallocate those resources. And right now, given the current allocation, it's hard for them to reallocate the resources because some of the people within the economy have become so dependent on the way that the government has been allocating the resources that it's hard to imagine where you can't reduce the wage bill, not at the speed that it needs to be. You can't reduce your social grants, because people have become dependent on this, how people survive. And this is why this SDR grant, the current grant, the 350 Rand or 370 Rand, it's going to be hard for them to reverse that, because people have now become quite dependent on it. And this whole idea of having a universal grant is because it's born from the fact that reversing a grant like that is almost nearly impossible when people have become dependent on it. So rearranging that allocation is going to be very, very hard. So that's why I'm saying people are not going to borrow government any more money if they know that they're going to allocate it in the way they've been done before. And that's how they're running out of money. And they're running out of space to actually be able to be given grace to get more money and be able to do it at a reasonable interest rate.
I mean, I read a stat that the presidency was quite proud of the other day, which is 28 million people getting some kind of a grant, which is a staggering amount of people. It's nearly half the country.
There's 60 million people, and it's a lot of children.
It's a lot of people reliant on the state. I mean, that's why the state has to work. I mean, Tim, what are your thoughts on that particular issue, holding municipalities accountable? I mean, you live in the Karoo. I'm not sure if that had a municipality in the last 400 years, but I mean, how do you hold a municipality accountable if nobody cares?
No, I live in a tiny little town in the Karoo, and I was saying earlier, it's a fantastic education to be, close to a very small city council, because there's the need of the town is just enormous. It's just enormous, and I don't think you really sort of feel it until you know the people who are running the towns, and it's incredibly tough job. And there's quite a lot of bickering in small towns, and so it's quite difficult to run. There's the levels of expertise are kind of low, and
and that's just in your household.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. I mean, actually, strangely, oddly enough, having said all of that, the little town that I live in, Prince Albert, or close to, they're doing great. It's a sort of like, the strangest thing. There's an immediacy about the distance between the politicians and the people. The town is quite small. It's close. People see each other. They meet each other in the street. They sort of there's a lot of goodwill, but it's very tenuous, and it can disintegrate extremely fast. Occasionally it has. In the 10 years or so that I've been living in the town, there have been periods where, it's really been touch and go. And I can see in some of the towns around, they've just imploded, and it's a very depressing thing because you see, it's a microcosm of South Africa as a whole, because people can move out of a town very fast and do, so they move from, one of the odd things about living in this little town is, my respect for farmers has just exploded. I always had a sort of like a broad kind of knowledge of, but some of them are the levels of innovation and expertise in South Africa's farming communities is huge. And it's very underestimated. I sort of think. I think farmers should dress better. If they were more stylish, the town people wouldn't be so dismissive of the.
They wouldn't be being genocided, as Trump says.
Yes.
On a related but different subject, Jannie, you're on the corruption and crime task force. I mean, that's the one reform that still has to gain traction. You can say electricity's worked, ports might be getting better. Certainly Transnet talks about how the ports are so much better and they can point to reduced times, but crime and corruption still seems completely intractable. And I think that's kind of demonstrated by that complete circus that is the police inquiry at the moment. I mean, how difficult is it to run a business in that construct? And surely that affects the level of inward investment in a big way.
Yeah, it's a different, let's put it in different buckets. Clearly, crime and corruption, inward investment, a huge influence. Tourism, a huge influence. So that is, but it's more the what we would call the crime on the streets. And that is not something where we get involved. And why we keeping deliberately below is, I don't want to become a target. Again, so we're trying to keep things below what we do, but we really focus on things where we think we can add value. So we actually, and that is, I think you've mentioned that is where we got the expertise there we can. So what we've done is we've got 3 different things that we're running at the moment. What we call is a digital evidence unit. There's no press around here. So no. No, but some of the things that you see coming out, especially in some of these WhatsApp, is the digital evidence units that we've established, or software that can, for the first time on the African continent, that they can actually analyze your cell phone, even it's been wiped completely clean, it's been thrown into a dam, that they can still get the WhatsApp messages of you, what sites you visited, who you've spoken to. So be careful. So the software is out there now in Africa as well. So, and you will see a lot more coming out in that area that we provide that service to IDEX specifically. Then the other work stream is on the grey listing side, between ourselves and the bank, that we've identified 20 money laundering cases. We're busy prosecuting 2 at the moment, because it's part of you had to actually show the intent to prosecuting money laundering cases. So we've identified 20, we're busy doing 2, all funded by the private sector and the banks on those things. So the government was supposed to do it 50-50, but they're struggling through their bureaucracy to get us the money. So we're only doing 2. We wanted to do 6 already at this point in time. And then the third one that we're actually putting a lot of emphasis on, and it's in the early stages, illegal smuggling. Gold, tobacco, diesel, and then liquor. Fortunately, we involve some of those industries on the liquor side, but the economy is losing 100 billion rand a year just because of illegal. And it's all things that are quite easy to fix, because they all relate when you put tax on a product. And once you put tax on a product, once you create a tax incentive for people to do illegal smuggling, you all get your clever people involved in that, and they do it. And interesting enough, in all those 4 industries, a lot of people involved, but it seems like always the boss is always the same people. It's like the Italian mafia, not the Stellenbosch mafia, the Italian mafia. The Italian mafia on top of that. So those are the areas that we concentrate, but we want to deliberately keep it below the radar screen, because you might become targets and people might actually find other ways for that. So I actually think we're getting a lot of traction, but we try to keep it out of the public eye specifically in that respect.
But and the police inquiry, I mean, surely the concept of the police, even particularly looking.
I was actually, I mean, we've met when I was Minister Mashuna was actually suspended. We actually had quite a few meetings with him. I actually liked him, and he was very cooperative and things like that. So I was very surprised and disappointed. But I actually think it's a little bit of a good thing. Let everybody throw everything into the open. It becomes transparent, and we all know who's saying what and things like that. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, and maybe that's what we need. It's like a good fight with your wife, and everything comes into the open, and hopefully after that you love one another a bit more. But I actually don't think it's such a bad thing. Let it all come out. And now, because I'll start accusing you, you've got something, and me accusing me of something, and hopefully all of this corruption, all of these things, who's peddling a political influence might come out. So she's quite riveting, to listen to some of the stuff.
You haven't met my wife, to speak. Indy, I wanted to ask your thoughts on crime in terms of an inhibitor on GDP growth. I mean, how serious is that? I mean, I'm sure it's a massive disincentive for investments.
It definitely is. I mean, let's say you're a small business owner, although...
We actually are.
Oh, are you? How willing...
Not Jannie, he's a very, very big business.
But you'll be less willing or less able to actually try and expand your business if you're scared there's going to be somebody who's going to try and extort you. If you're scared that the next day you're not sure if someone's going to break in and steal all your things. It's always this uncertainty of, am I safe in trying to not only just run my business, but try and grow my business? And I think that's sort of a huge disincentive for businesses to try and reinvest in their own businesses and to try and invest in the economy as a whole. So I think it's a huge hindrance, and it's hard to imagine a point out of it. And I know you're saying bringing everything out in the open is what you need, but just seeing how much of it is just so bad. How do we get past this? How do we rebuild if, let's say, it does come out that the police are completely corrupt? How do you rebuild the police?
That's why you say if.
Stay a little bit, you never know what's going to come out. You never know. So if they are, how do you build a police system? How do you build like a crime and intelligence system so that businesses and people feel comfortable operating in a country and like being economically active in the country? So it's going to be a long road, depending on how it ascends.
Is that, I mean, I read a story this week about their massive amounts on corporate balance sheets not being invested. Is that one of the inhibitors? People just don't want to invest because they don't feel secure about that? Or is it the global environment? You're not sure where tariffs are going, where the US economy is going? I mean, to what extent is it South African focused and to what extent it's global?
I would give it sort of like 80-20. So 80% South Africa based and maybe 20% sort of global environment. And the reason I say this is that the sort of huge cash balances that we've seen by corporates is not a new thing. It didn't start in 2024. It has been building over probably like almost a decade in South Africa, where corporates are just not willing to invest the money. They rather sort of wait and see. They're uncertain of the environment in South Africa from a structural perspective. Is government able to actually implement the structural reforms? Is government actually able to implement any of the things that they've been talking about? Are they able to get out of the way so that we can do it? And what they want to see is proof points. It's not enough to just talk about it. It's not enough to just say these things and have a sonar once a year. They want to actually see the difference happening on the ground before they actually want to release that money. So it's definitely unhelpful when you have a global environment of tariffs and tariff uncertainty and these tensions and even the geopolitical tensions happening in the Middle East or in Europe. It's not helpful, but take that away, I think we'll still have a huge cash balance by corporates, because South Africa is in such a state that they are unwilling or unable to find places where they can invest their money.
Jannie, Remgro is an active investor. You invest in some really fantastic new businesses, new economy businesses like CCOM, like CIVH, like fiber. Do you agree with that point that there's so much investment that's still locked up because of those reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Think about it, if you go and I'm putting myself, and doesn't matter who you are, you're putting yourself in a foreign investor want to come into South Africa. You read in the press about expropriation without compensation, the protection of intellectual property, all of those, nationalization of assets, nationalization of the banks. Do you really want to park your money here? And then you're actually also dealing on top of that with infrastructural problems, on top of that with a low growth environment. There is going to be a reluctance to invest. We proudly South Africans, so we do what we think we have. We look for opportunities that we think we can get superior growth. We look for opportunities. Look at the remarkable success story of Capitec. Just in a low growth environment, what they've established, disrupting the things coming from the left side, looking at it from a different perspective, keeping it simple, and remarkable success. They're now bigger than First Rand. It's not on the profit level, but on the market cap side. And that is where we saw the opportunity essentially with fiber. And then we saw the opportunity in getting when we've developed with some local intellectual property, how we can go cheaply into township, roll out fiber as a cheap product for less than 100 Rand a month. Probably not many people know it. When we invested in Vodacom in 1994, prepaid was developed in South Africa. And remember how that actually democratized communication and things like that. If it wasn't for prepaid, because of the credit risks, the cell phone industry wouldn't have been here today. When we did the original business plan, I still got that for Vodacom, we predicted the total market to be about 1 million people for cell phones in the whole of South Africa, because we didn't know prepaid existed.
Is it now 100 million SIM cards? What is the SIM card?
About 4 per person.
Gracious. That's incredible. Some of those success stories are fantastic, and I don't think, in a sense, has South African companies' corporate sector been too conservative? That allegation is lodged at the banks the whole time, that they don't lend enough. Do you think that we haven't backed the big stories enough? People talk about, the banks talk about what a surprise Capitec was. Does that indicate that we've been too conservative when it comes to some plans?
Yeah, and I've said that to government, I said that to DTI. You could accuse us of not investing, but when we want to invest, you prohibit us from doing that for 4 years. And so, let your oggendpraatjies, naandpraatjies, let stem oor in what you say in the morning, at least say the same thing in the evening. Don't then accuse us of being just a hypocrite. Interestingly enough, so if we started OUTsurance, OUTsurance was started by the First Rand Group, and I've lost a big bet. And I said, we've became very successful, and they wanted to expand to Australia. And I said, I've seen many companies, Woolworths and in the old days Westbank, that went to Australia. And
investing?
South Africans have lost a lot of money in Australia. I said, we should not do it. And I've lost a bet. We gave them a billion rand at that point in time, about 8 in 2015. I just get my 2014. Today, the outsurance business, which is called U in Australia, is bigger than the South African business, hugely successful. So don't underestimate some South Africans that will actually take the money if they don't see opportunity or they go invest in big successful. We've invested $75 million into the UAE, into 5 hospitals. There's only 2 at this moment. At that point in time, we've expanded that. That is multiples of today of what it used to be in 2007. So people will invest outside.
You might, for even in Australia, I love that place.
Can I just make a point about that too? I do think that we live in an era of dislocation, because there's such an enormous difference between the narrative level of, what people talk about and discuss, and sort of what's happening on the ground. I think the best example of that is the JSE at an absolute record. I remember sitting in the Business Day newsroom, and I was very proud of the fact I was the company's editor at the time, and I was very proud of the fact that we were going to have a big story tomorrow because the JSE is going to go over 10,000 points, and and now it's it's 100,000. Anyway, I mean so there is this, and the same dislocation, in a sense, exists at an international level, because if you ask most people, I guess, I don't know, but my sense is that there's a high level of anxiety out there at the moment, generally. And yet, stock markets all over the world are at their highest points, actually, by all of the metrics are all of the formal metrics. Or a lot of the formal metrics are, they showing up extremely well. So, the international poverty rate is now, Claire would know this number offhand, but it's gone from around about people living under $2 a day. We're talking about something like 15% of the global population now. And yet, I do think that in the interpretation I have of this, I don't know whether it's the correct one. I'd be interested in your view, but I do think the thing to watch in South Africa, we should be watching most carefully consumer confidence and business confidence. Those 2 indexes, for me, those are the ones that have to move, and those are the ones that that government needs to be focused on. Interestingly, consumer confidence is now back down to the point it was before the GNU was established, and that's, to me, that's very worrying.
Indeed, did Tim just make that up? Is that accurate?
No, he didn't. No, he's correct. And business confidence is also down, but not back to the levels before the GNU, but definitely lower than what it's been in the recent years. So it's quite concerning how you can't get businesses and consumers feeling more positive and more confident about the South African economy, and how to get that. Like I think you're completely right. Get that right. And it's really going to just feed on itself, and the economy is going to grow, especially on the business confidence side. If you look at the correlation between business confidence and private sector investment, it's positively correlated. Thank you. So if you get them more confident, they'll be more willing to spend money and invest in their country.
Jannie, I want to ask, to explain to people who are not CAs and smarts in finance, why is gold at a record high and the JSE at a record high, but yet the economy in the world seems so fragile?
It's over 4,200 today.
It's massive.
They're predicting going to go to $5,000. I don't know where I read it, but I think it's a little bit like the big 7 at the moment and AI. So people say we can't be left behind by not investing in AI. So it's a bit of this herd mentality. There's only 7 stocks that you can really invest into if you really want to have an exposure to AI. The big 7, that's probably and that is why, they're at record levels. Nvidia has to grow for the next 20 years at more than 50% just to justify the rating that they've got. So that's quite daunting if you think about it. And I think that's a little bit why gold is up. So people are actually starting questioning these valuations of this big seven. Not just let's stick to the big seven. And I think that maybe we should diversify. And suddenly gold has become of the geopolitical things that's happening on a global basis quite popular. Now that's great. So maybe that's where we should actually diversify. So I think a little bit of diversifying out of the big seven into the gold, and that could be, but I might be totally wrong.
You want to buy Anglo Gold then? You could buy Anglo Gold. India, I wanted to ask, I mean, you mentioned AI. That's a big theme in every single investment discussion in the last year. But surely in a country like South Africa, surely AI means massive job losses. Is that not a big concern for this country?
Job losses to start, but then there's literally job opportunities in other areas because of AI. I think it's the same idea around industrialization, where people are like, oh, people are going to lose their jobs because the machines are coming. But then you get opportunities in other areas where you can create the jobs. And this is why I think when you spoke about education, this is where the importance of education and forward thinking becomes quite vital, in that stop looking at the sort of more traditional areas where you think employment will happen or where you think education needs to be invested in. Start looking into the future where AI becomes such an important part of people's or businesses' lives. Where are the opportunities for you to actually gain this advantage, and where is this opportunity for you to gain knowledge so that you can actually be able to participate in an environment where AI is going to be part of our lives. I mean, eventually it's going to happen. I think people are a little too excited about it because it's still at the beginning stages, but at some point it's something that's seriously going to be considered as part of the daily lives of people, and whether you want it or not, it's going to happen. So we just need to find a way to re-educate and restructure our education system to take advantage of it instead of being so scared of it.
I mean, Jannie, do you have faith that South Africa's government can do that, can educate people? I mean, I think that the education system has been the real frail thing for South Africa over the last 30 years. I mean, that's part of the reason why we have 28 million people on grants. I think we haven't skilled people enough. We haven't created enough businesses. We haven't done enough. Do you feel that we are able to educate for an AI world?
I won't trust the government to do. Their track record is not very good in doing that. So I would probably go to the private sector to do that. And I think it's our obligation, and where if we live in a town, to make sure that that works. Where AI can play a role is, and I don't want to go back to it, but how do you actually get educated? Educated by a teacher. We haven't got enough educated teachers in South Africa. But there's enough teachers out there on the internet world. The best lectures you can find if you just connect it to the internet. If you can just, and where AI then actually can play a very critical role in that. Because the interaction, if you just get a lecture, is a one-way downstream. It's very difficult to ask questions and query that, and if you're struggling, falling down. But AI's got that ability to interact with the individual learner, but you need connectivity with that. And I think there AI can play a huge role, that you can have less teachers, because we haven't got enough, but more educated teachers to help facilitate that program. I think teaching will come less and less, where people actually teach from the front. It will become more interactive thing with connectivity, and teachers are facilitating that learning process with AI. That we need to go for. Remember Africa, and I think that is where we probably got advantage, because we haven't got too much invested in certain areas. But what happened in Africa in the mobile space? It skipped fixed line. It skipped completely fixed line. It went from nothing to mobile. And so they never had telephones in Kenya or
Nigeria
areas. So they skipped, they immediately went to mobile. That's why if you go to Kenya today, on the online payments, digital payments, far ahead of South Africa, because they just went straight to online, to mobile, and they utilized that technology to do payments, banking, things like that. So hopefully we can actually, if we've got a huge problem, maybe hopefully we can skip that divide by using technology and AI better in South Africa in the education space.
I wanted to ask, Ndivhuho, I mean, one of the obstacles that a lot of people have talked about in the last couple of weeks has been black empowerment. Is it an obstacle to GDP growth? And William Gumede, for example, the Wits professor, said that, I spoke to him about this, I'm not sure if I believe his stats, but he says R1 trillion of value has been transferred to less than 100 people over the last 30 years, which sounds dubious. And Parks Town last week spoke of the need to review black empowerment. I mean, do you think it has been an obstacle? Do you think it's been net negative? Do you think it's currently disincentive, or how do you see it?
It's a complicated, I guess, topic, because unfortunately BE and sort of the old EE vibe is definitely necessary in South Africa with the history that we have, with the history of apartheid, where you have a vast majority of the population outside of the economic system completely sort of left out. You need regulations like that to try to get them in, because unfortunately it's unlikely to happen naturally. I understand how it can be a bit of a hindrance for economic growth or maybe some business growth, but then it's sort of the price you need to pay to operate in a country like South Africa. And as unhelpful as it can be, it's also very vital to help South Africa reduce the level of inequality, to reduce the level of poverty. It's one of the sort of, I don't want to say necessary evils, but necessary steps that South Africa, like a country like South Africa, needs to take. I think other regulations are actually a bigger hindrance than your BEE. There's other things that I think are more vital to try and deregulate. And this focus on BEE, I think, is kind of limiting the focus on sort of the more important areas where you need to streamline a lot of the government regulation and reduce the red tape. Like if you had your CIPC, which is where you have to register if you want to start a business, and you had SARS, and you had there's a construction board where you, as a construction sort of company, you need to also register with. You have to register with 3 different government organizations in order to operate if you're a construction business. Streamlining that, creating one system where SARS can speak to the CPIC, can speak to the construction board in order for you to actually operate more efficiently. That's the area we need to focus, and that's what government's focus needs to be, the area where the real unlocking of opportunities in streamlining regulation and reducing regulation. I think that's where it is.
Jannie, do you agree? I mean, you guys have done a lot of work on transformation in your companies.
So we've done a lot of, we forget about this week. We've done a lot of PE deals, and some have been successful, some of them haven't been so successful, and we're proud of the ones that we've done that has been successful. But I always say every point of control is a point of corruption, I think, and that is unfortunately got abused. Became some corrupt things. A few select people have benefited from that, and unfortunately that is something that gave it a very, very bad reputation. I think it needs to be re-looked at and done in different ways, and must be broad-based, it must be more social-based, more investments, sustainable investments, and not equity. I don't think equity is a solution. There must be some other areas, and we've got many ideas. But yeah, we've done that, and we've been successful, proud of that, but I think it's been abused.
Guys, I've asked a lot of questions, which has been great for me, but that feels a bit selfish. Does anyone else have any questions for the esteemed panel, which I'm sure will be a lot smarter than what I've asked? Any hands, guys? I could pick on people. That would be bad. There is a question. There's 2 questions.
Hi there. For fear of sounding like a writer in front of a room full of journalists, and also for fear of...
It's okay, mate. We're Australian journalists. It's fine.
Also for the fear of maybe breaking the glass for anyone who hasn't realized, but everything spoken tonight, the challenges we face in South Africa is lack of industrialization, over-regulation, corruption, the classic problem South Africa has faced for the last 30 years. And being the topic of the night, the GNU and how we can fix it, it feels like from a civilian, a citizen of South Africa, like the gods of Olympus are fighting and it's just thundering on us. What is it that we can do? Starting business is one thing, but you've mentioned how impossible it is almost to make a successful business in this climate. And it's almost preaching to the choir. Everyone here knows that it's the government mostly making it difficult for us. What do we do? How do we break through that? We start a business and hope for the best?
As journalists, we are sort of professionally pessimistic, and I've always been very proud of the fact that I'm not. I'm actually optimistic, and I do think that you do solve problems by having them. And I'm not confident about this GNU, but I do think that directionally, South Africa is I'm more hopeful about it than I should be, I think. So, it's Claire's thing about sort of precipice politics. We're very good at that, and in a perverse kind of way, I'm glad that we're at another precipice. I'm hopeful.
Do we overinflate the risks? I mean, the thing is, I think everyone here is positive about the country. That's why you're here and not in Gauteng, where everything's going great. I mean, in London. I mean, is that not it? I mean, everyone is positive about. They still want to believe it'll work. I mean, Jannie, what do you think? I mean, we still hold out hope.
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I'm positive. I live here. I want to make it work. So that's why I get involved. I did national service in 1985 and 86. I'm doing it all over again with sort of crime and corruption work stream. Yeah, it's actually nice to be South African sometimes. I mean, we just won 2 World Cups in a row. Our women cricket team is doing well. Our Bafana is qualified for the World Cup. Let's look at the positives and don't. But I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think if you're positive and you look forward and you're proactive, I think we can make it work. We've created some great business. That's why I use the examples of like the Altshurers, the Americans, of what we can do. We've got some unbelievable people in the country, and I said we'll work for it. I don't know if you saw the results today. Just on the way here, I was on X. I still talk about Twitter, but the ANC got a snot clap in the local elections, and I think that we're going to see more and more of that going forward, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Maybe some people will get more realistically. Remember, it's local, you understand the political situation better, but it's a local government election, then it's a next ANC election. Hopefully, they will speed up things when they see what's happening now. Actually, what the people on the ground are voting with their feet at the moment, or actually voting with their crosses at the moment, and I think hopefully that will be a big wake-up call. Because the things are not difficult. I mean, it's quite sort of 1 + 1 is not difficult what we have to do, to be quite frank.
My friend Stuart Theobald used to work in South Africa as a journalist, and he's now living in London and runs a consultancy there. And he says, like no matter what you do, you can't make a difference. I feel like this country, you can really make a difference. I think in the media industry, that's why we did this. Like, you write stories, people pay attention, stuff happens. The Gupta leaks was because of the media to some extent. I think that you really can make a difference in this country because it's so small, and that's fantastic. But you try to do that in London or New York, you really are a cog. I really feel that there's agency and instrumentality. Am I too optimistic again?
And I like the optimism. I think it's actually very, very true. You vote with your pen, you vote with your pen. A lot of people can make a difference by just being loud enough in South Africa. You have the opportunity to be loud enough in South Africa. You get lost in sort of your bigger economies where you can be as loud as you want. It's just there's always somebody louder. But in South Africa, if you're loud enough and you're loud enough in the right rooms with the right people saying the right things, then difference actually can be made. So yeah. There's still a lot of hope, and I think South Africa is at a turning point. I really, really believe that it's a big ship that's hard to turn, but it is turning, and that's sort of where I'm at right now. And it really is thanks to the people, it's thanks to the journalists, and it's thanks to businesses who have not shut up. They didn't shut up about it. They didn't give up on it. They just kept talking and kept saying what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, and government hopefully is finally listening.
A question. You had a question as well. Do you need a microphone?
Thank you. Okay, so just to add a bit of a global perspective to the...
She just released a book this week, by the way, I have to say, just as well. It's a fabulous book.
Right, thank you. Okay, so yes, global perspective. Considering that money is a human-made construct, right? We came up with this as a species. What do you think is our capacity to just redesign the global economy away from this artificial scarcity, sort of place that we're at right now, and actually just create the funds needed to create a system that prioritizes taking care of people and taking care of the environment?
I think that's another easy one for Ndi. So it's all Bitcoin based. Is that how we're going?
You're telling me, well, we just need to just print more money and everybody... It's literally just give people money and it's fine, right?
Did you speak to Donald Trump last week?
I think it's an impossible, capitalism as a system is so entrenched. I mean, I guess you'll know about that. It's such an entrenched part of how we live our lives. It's hard to imagine an environment where we can reimagine the global economy away from that idea of And it's an unfortunate thing where you want to accumulate as a person as much as possible, and you live in an environment, or you live in a world where you're saying it's a zero-sum game where I gain as much as I can and you sort of lose as much as I can because I'm gaining, type of thing. I can't imagine a system where it's like reimagined and have to be sort of a big bang environment again, where we're like starting over. And the idea of trade has always existed in the world, right? As long as people have existed. And I think even, I wouldn't know, actually, I'm not much of a sort of expert on this, where animals also do trade, right? So right now we trade with money, before we trade with other things, and it's something that's always existed. So another system that revolves around trade, I don't see it being as successful unless you get the buy-in from people who hold the power right now. And they wouldn't buy that in because it'll involve them losing power, or losing some of that kind of power. So
What's the best or worst system we have?
honestly, probably.
Yeah. More questions, guys? Were there any more? We had 2 questions at the back.
Hi there, guys. So I'll give you a bit of a perspective. I mean, we're, like, both of us are fourth-year finance students at UCT, so we're kind of entering into the workforce now. So it's obviously quite exciting, but obviously a bit scary. But I think to shed some light from our perspective, we've had a guest lecture from Anchor Capital recently, and they were mentioning the fact that a 3% inflation target now obviously brings some light. I mean, we've been targeting an inflation that's far higher than that of our comparatives overseas. So is there not something to be said for that, in terms of once you reach a lower inflation target, you can lower interest rates, and after that you can see lower repo rates, and that's when you'll see the growth. And like you said, what you're wanting is growth from the economy, from the people at the entrepreneurship level. And if you can do microloans like Capitec does at a low inflation level, I think that's where you'll see some light. But at what point in time do you actually realize that, I think?
It's definitely a question for Ndi.
Let's say all the questions. Yeah, definitely a 3% inflation target is probably, it's got more good than bad in terms of like implications for the economy. Of course, in the short term, while the Reserve Bank is trying to actually get to the 3% target, you might have to live with higher interest rates to get to that target. But once you get to that target, then you're going to have a lower real cost of capital, where it's easier for you to raise capital and be able to actually invest at a cheaper rate, which obviously is good not only for businesses but even for consumers, when they don't have to think about, oh, if I don't spend my R1 today, it's going to cost so much more less like in the future. So they're more willing to save. And South Africa is definitely not a saving country, and if you have a lower inflation rate, I think that idea of, oh no, if I don't spend this money right now, it's going to be worth less in the future because of inflation, you'll get more people willing to save and willing to sort of hold off sort of the current consumption. And when you have higher savings, it naturally translates, or economic theory says it naturally translates to higher investment opportunities, or higher money for investment from a domestic perspective. So I think there are definitely more positives. How long it'll take for us to get there really will depend on how strict I think the Reserve Bank is going to be in achieving it. They can decide whether, if, let's say, during the medium-term budget statement that's going to happen now in November, if the National Treasury says, okay, our new inflation target is 3%, the Reserve Bank can say, we want to achieve that 3% in 2 years' time, get there. In 2 years' time, we want to do it immediately. And that's literally up to them and how they then change the repo rate or change their monetary policy making decision to achieve it. And from my perspective, I think it'll really depend on changing inflation expectations. A huge part of how inflation sort of settles where it settles is how people act, or how they think inflation will be in 12 months' time and in 24 months' time. So changing inflation expectations is going to be the key to doing that. It'll take probably, I say, maybe 18 months to try and get inflation expectations lower. They were able to do it in 2017 quite quickly, but I think it's going to be harder for them to do it now, because 3% just seems so low. As a real person sitting there thinking, okay, getting it to 3% doesn't seem like it's achievable. And the unfortunate thing is, when we had inflation, when we have, I guess now, our 3 to 6% inflation target, the Reserve Bank has been able to achieve that 75% of the time. If they have a 3% target now, other countries, let's say, look at Chile, for example. They have a 3% target. They're an emerging market. The central bank there is only able to achieve that target only 50% of the time. So what's that going to mean for the credibility of the Reserve Bank if they can't really achieve that target immediately? And if that's the case, then you might actually get a little bit of a dislodge when it comes to inflation expectations. So a lot of it is in play, but I think overall it's definitely one of the sort of macro policies that I think is a good development in South Africa.
What we need is Donald Trump to come and kick out the Reserve Bank governor. Was there one more question?
Yeah. You mentioned the construction industry. I was just wondering what your take on that is, whether they will change the red tape. Have you got any insight on that? I currently work in the industry and it is just completely bogged down from plans to banks to, yeah. Do you have any insights on that? Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, so I was just wondering around insights on that.
No, I think I'll say, like, construction has been in sort of recession for the past 8 years now. So it's definitely in the trenches. I'm not in government, so I can't tell you what the plans are in terms of like trying to reduce red tape. But what I'll tell you is they speak a lot about it. So they do know that it's a problem. They do understand it. It's the problem again becomes getting buy-in from all the other departments. So getting DTI to come to the party, getting the sort of competition commission to come to the party. So the presidency and Operation Vulindlela might be well aware of this issue, but it's getting the other departments to then buy into it and actually want to, because as, I guess, the presidency, they can't implement without the other departments, unless, I mean, maybe you call a cabinet meeting with the sort of ministers and tell them this is what's going to happen. I can't see it happening, yeah.
Jannie, Tim, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean,
Yeah, frankly, I will say so. What my biggest concern about the construction industry, when we get the tailwinds and things start to grow, we're not going to have a construction industry. I mean, that is a problem. We're not going to have the skills. We're not going to have the people to execute on this. Let's call it this. And that is my concern. So hopefully we can train more electricians, artisans, more of these people that we're ready when these things, that we got the capacity and things, because we're so way behind. So that is a big concern. Can I make a totally unrelated comment?
Absolutely.
If you don't mind.
Most of what I say is unrelated to
I have to say this. You asked, and what reminded me is your question about why did we invest in e-media right at the start. It wasn't my decision, and I was part of it, but my chairperson, as I say, you 100%. We can't afford not to have an independent broadcaster in South Africa. And I just want to commend the journalist era that actually keeps this country going, that exposes when things go wrong, that tell the truth and do this. I think this is so important in the South African context of where we stand today. So I just want to thank the two of you, of people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think...
Ro, can I just make a point on the previous question? You know, I just I do think that there is a quite big changes taking place in the complete global context, and I think it's so interesting because, and the one stat that is people do point out is that interest rates in Greece are now lower than interest rates in America, and would you have thought that would happen? But you see it in other places too. The rand is you don't want to tempt fate, but it is looking like it might go under 17 to the dollar, and it's been 10%, 15% up this year. Quite big things are happening in the global arena, and not all bad, so...
I think I've kept you guys way too late. So, I mean, perhaps we could just have one final word from each of you. I mean, what would be, in terms of igniting growth in the economy, what would be the big game changer for South Africa? I think that would be, perhaps Ndivhuho, if you want to start.
For me, it'd be government realizing that fixed investment is the basis with which to grow the economy. They can't do it themselves. They need the private sector. So they need to do whatever it takes to make the private sector happy so that they are willing to participate in growing the economy through fixed investment, improving infrastructure, and getting the employment or unemployment numbers under control.
And Tim, besides exiling Gavin Hood, which I'm sure is pretty high on your list.
Do you know who Gavin Hood is?
He got an Oscar.
He hasn't done a movie for ages.
He's not relevant like Tim.
Well, I've made my point, which is
She's our fate, Gavin Hood.
that understanding the utility of economic freedom is, to me, is the crucial thing.
I would do a very stupid thing. I would change the currency immediately. Huh? I would actually print new banknotes and say, everybody's got a month to go deposit all the cash that they got in the vaults or whatever, and we give you an amnesty only for a 10% tax, but you must go and deposit into a bank account and open a bank account. Imagine the revenue that the government will get out of that, of all this illicit cash that's sitting out there in the economy. Easy money.
That's fascinating.
Or under couches.
India's done it. It is international prayer. India's done it very successfully.
Well, that's
Very
fantastic.
successfully.
We get people to go to the president's house and collect the couches. And guys, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to our panel, to Stanlib, our partners. Talking of companies that stand up and make a difference. I think you guys are great. Jannie, to a company that's really making a difference in the country. I think that this optimism that Tim talks about is completely, investing in the economy, making things work. Thank you so much for being part of it, and I obviously endorse what you said about the media. It's very important. And Tim, for being fantastic and for not being Gavin Hood. Thank you so much. Thanks very much, guys.